Brett. So breaking tonight on The Story, the earthquake continues to shake USA Gymnastics. Today, the entire board submitted their resignations as required by the U.S. Olympic Committee. Tonight, an exclusive interview and the now expanding investigation of who else knew, including the famed coaches who hired Nasser, the Karolis.
It's really hard for me to believe that they didn't know what was going on. And if they didn't know, then they honestly did not care.
The Karoli Ranch is just, I think, the abuse there and how intense it was. And that, like I said, that was our only way to get to our dream. That was the only way to get to the Olympics.
More on that in a moment. But first tonight, House Intel Chair Devin Nunes, the man at the center of the fire over releasing the 4-page memo about what he says are highly questionable tactics by the FBI during the 2016 election, saying this tonight. Having stonewalled Congress's demands for information for nearly a year, it is no surprise to see the FBI and DOJ issue spurious objections to allowing the American people to see information related to surveillance abuses at these agencies. That in response to the Bureau saying that the Nunes memo contains omissions that make it inaccurate. So who is right? The president caught on a hot mic last night saying he will authorize the public release of this memo.
Let's release the memo. Oh, yeah. Oh, don't worry. 100%. Can you imagine?
100%. Trace Gallagher in our West Coast newsroom tonight as the memo fight gets hot this evening. Trace.
Martha, while the president says he is 100% planning to release the memo, White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders appears to be tapping the brakes on that statement, saying there's always a chance the memo won't be released. Sanders told CNN the president had not seen or been briefed on the memo's contents and that the White House plans to complete the, quote, legal and national security review before deciding whether to release it. Sanders' statement also appears to conflict with comments made by White House Chief of Staff John Kelly. On Monday, Kelly met with FBI Director Christopher Wray and Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, both of whom are trying to convince the White House not to release the memo, arguing that it leaves out key facts that impact the document's accuracy. Then late yesterday, Fox News has learned that 5 career officials from the FBI came to see John Kelly with a brand new version of that FISA memo that was supposed to allay the concerns about the document's accuracy. But apparently the FBI also objected to that brand new version. And today, General Kelly said this to Brian Kilmeade. Listen.
Did you see it?
I did.
What do you think?
It'll be released here pretty quick, I think, and the whole world can see it.
Remember, the 4-page memo was written by Republicans on the House Intel Committee and alleges that during the presidential campaign, the FBI used unsubstantiated information in the so-called Trump dossier to obtain a warrant to monitor a former Trump advisor. Today, Devin Nunes released a statement that reads in part, quote, once the truth gets out, we can begin taking steps to ensure our intelligence agencies and courts are never misused like this again. Democrats say the memo is only meant to weaken the law enforcement agencies behind Robert Mueller's investigation of Russian meddling in the 2016 election. And despite this highly unusual public battle between the White House and the FBI, both sides reportedly expect the memo to be released very soon. Yeah. Martha.
Trace, thank you. Here with more on the memo and the growing concern over the culture of leadership at the FBI, Danny Colson, former FBI Deputy Assistant Director. Danny, good evening. Glad to see you tonight. Thanks for being here. Good evening. So what do you make over this battle over the memo? Do you think it should be released?
Well, the most important thing is that it be accurate. It's like a rifle shot. You can't unshoot a rifle. And this memo has to be accurate. From what I understand from the reporting, it's devastating. And if it's inaccurate or there are things that should be in it that aren't, then it should be modified. And the director of the FBI and his staff have the facts, and they would know if it's inaccurate. But I think the key here is convincing the president and his staff that more needs to be put into it or it needs to be revised. But what we're talking about here is truth. Was there any effort or any attempt or any actual success in misleading the FISA court? And if that happened, then I think we need to know about that. And that memorandum's got to reflect that question and that answer for the American people. There's a lot at stake here. This is not just a memo. This is the reputation of a federal agency, one that I worked for 31 years. And I want to be sure that they clear the air here, and let's get beyond this and get on, let the FBI do its job.
So the suggestion, I just like to go back to the basics on this, because the suggestion is that people at the FBI wanted to get the Trump campaign, and that they needed, in order to do that, in order to try to derail their campaign, they had to prove what their theory was, which was that there was some kind of nefarious connection to Russia. So they had to go to the FISA court in order to get surveillance on an individual in order to prove that he was up to no good. Now, you're saying that if there was anything untoward in the way they presented the evidence, which could have been the dossier, in order to say to the FISA court, give us what we need to get surveillance on this guy, and we need it quick, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the FISA court is essential in the war against terrorism. I've used it many, many times, and we need that. And if we somehow denigrate the process that allows that court to reach a decision, that hurts everybody. It will be very circumspect about what we try to, or what the Bureau tries to bring to them. And we need to know the facts here. If that happened, then the people that did that, if it was done, need to be severely judged on what they did. If they didn't do it, we need to know that too.
Let's put up on the screen some of the changes in personnel at DOJ and FBI over the course of all of this. You have James Comey, who was fired by the president. You have Peter Strzok, who was reassigned. Lisa Page was reassigned. Baker is no longer there. Chief of Staff Rybicki left, and Andrew McCabe was removed, in the words of the DOJ. So clearly they know that they have a problem.
Oh, yes. And I would strongly suggest they find the best criminal attorney they can and let them represent them. The Bureau makes mistakes sometimes to accuse people. So does the Department of Justice. We saw that today with Menendez. The department didn't convict him. But the only issue we're talking about is what happened. And what happened is paramount importance to the current FBI, to the future FBI, and to the agents across the world who support their country and do a good job. But we need to know. And if that memo is not correct, then it needs to be corrected. If it is correct, it should be released.
You bring up a great point, because people like you, obviously, who spent your career there, and others like James Kallstrom, who's been very public about his concerns about leadership at the FBI and the department that he knows and loves throughout the years that he was there. If there was something that was wrong, why wouldn't the FBI want to air it? Why wouldn't they want to say, you know what, here's what we found, and this doesn't wash, and these people are gonna be fired?
Well, I think that the director needs a roadmap. He needs to know what happened. And from his position, coming in cold with all this scandal swirling around and innuendos and what's true and what's not true, if I were back there, I'd want to know what happened so you can remedy it. You can punish those that need punishing.
But he's defensive. He went to the FBI and said, do not release this document, even though we're getting reports that other FBI agents looked at it and said there's no sources and methods in there. There's no reason not to release this.
Well, I tend to agree with that, but I haven't read it. I'm not in a position to say if it's accurate or not. I don't know that. But bottom line is, truth generally is helpful. It's cleansing, and the FBI needs it at the very top. Not the FBI in general, but the very top, the former director of the FBI, what he brought in, and others, that needs to be remedied. We don't need to be there anymore.
Yeah. As you point out, Danny, the rank and file and the people who are there working every day are not part of this discussion. This is a different thing. And I know that those people mean a lot to you. So thank you so much. It's good to have you on tonight, Danny. We'll see you next time.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you. So still to come, brand new details coming in on the deadly train crash today on the way to the Republican congressional retreat. A real tragedy. And a bombshell from Hillary Clinton that was dropped just a few minutes before the State of the Union address, and it kind of slid under the radar. We'll show you what you may not have heard there. And my exclusive interview today with 3 elite U.S. athletes who were abused by Olympic Dr. Larry Nassar. Their brave stories right after this. Do you remember what was going through your mind at that time? What did he say to you about why he was doing what he was doing? Developing tonight, the former USA Gymnastics doctor accused of abusing nearly 300 victims was back in a Charlotte, Michigan courtroom again today, facing new charges of abuse. This time it's at a gymnastics club. Seems he took his so-called treatments all over Michigan. Larry Nassar sentenced to 175 years on 7 separate charges. Today, dozens of new women took the stand at a new sentencing to tell their stories of horror by one of the biggest names in the sport, like Tiffany Dutton.
I will say this. It takes a monster to sexually assault a child. That it takes a monster backed by ego, experience, and power fueled by multiple institutions to sexually assault a child in front of their own mother. It was uncomfortable and terrifying. But who was I to question the treatment that was supposed to heal me?
The army of survivors, athletes who were constantly around, as she said, other teammates, their coaches, their parents, begging the question, how did no one know? And what about the famed coach, Bella Caroli, and his wife, Marta? Many of these girls were sent to their ranch without their parents, and they were put under Nassar's care there. And what about USA Gymnastics, who oversaw this whole place, and the U.S. Olympic Committee? Today, the gymnastics governing body tweeted this: "We have received resignations from all of the members of its board of directors as required by the USOC. USA Gymnastics thanks the board members for their service. We are grateful for the time and effort that each has devoted to USA Gymnastics." But many of Nassar's victims say the investigation is only beginning. Today, I sat down with 3 of Larry Nassar's victims, Olympians and national team members, Maddie Larson, Jeanette Antolin, and Jamie Dantzler, in this exclusive story.
Jeanette, when you look back on it and you think about Larry, everyone has said he was one of the few people who was nice to you. Tell me about your first interaction with him and what you thought of him and how it all started.
He was about the only person that was nice, that was an adult. I don't remember my exact first interaction with him, but I just remember meeting him and knowing that he was the national team doctor. He was very important, very smart. We were taught that he knew everything. He knew how to fix any injury that you had. So with that being said, he then gains your trust by being a friend, confidant, giving you little gifts, making you feel special, and then develops into a friendship over the years because you worked with him for years if you're on the national team. So I mean, that was the relationship. He was a listening ear. He wanted to make you feel better. He always wanted to help out any way he could.
Maddie, you've spoken about the fact that this happened, these treatments happened while teammates were around, adults were around. Describe that for me.
A lot of the time with our interactions with Larry was at the Caroli Ranch, and we had what we called the treatment room, or we also called it the end room because that was the end of the hall. And there was a big TV, and there was a couch, and then there were 2 treatment tables behind the couch. So pretty much a lot of the time that he would treat us in that room, there were girls just chilling and watching TV, and that's what, he was so good at normalizing what he did. And there was usually another trainer in that room too. So I just thought, well, it can't be that bad what he's doing if he's doing it in front of my friends and my teammates and this other trainer. The first time I met Larry, I was 13, and then the first time I remember my first interaction of him molesting me was when I was 14. Until I was 19.
Do you remember what was going through your mind at that time? What did he say to you about why he was doing what he was doing?
So the first time that I actually remember him molesting me, I had a really bad hip injury, and it was like on my pelvic bone. So the first time he molested me, I was like, well, you know, this is just how you treat an injury in that region. And that was pretty much the only injury I ever had around that area, and everything else was from my knees down. And he was just so good at normalizing what he did and asking questions like, oh, does it feel better, what I'm doing? And I 100% thought that it was a medical treatment.
Jamie, did you ever say to anybody else on the team, does he do this to you? You know, this doesn't seem right?
I never talked about it with anybody. Like she said, I think that's a great word, how he normalized it. And the way I describe it to people is that I didn't talk about every time I put ice on or he taped my ankle, or I didn't go and talk about any treatment. In my mind, it was a medical treatment that was supposedly helping my back and my hips also. Did
Bella and Marta Caroli know what the treatment consisted of?
In my opinion, they had to know. They've known about, I know that they knew about sexual abuse dating back from the 70s, not from just Larry Nassar, but other coaches that they 100% knew that children were being sexually abused.
There were other coaches there that were abusing people?
Yeah, there's other coaches right now abusing athletes. That's why we keep talking about the whole culture and the fact that it's not just mental, physical, and emotional abuse, that I spent therapy, years of therapy trying to deal with that side of the abuse. And when I realized I was sexually abused, I said, just add it to the list.
Explain, give people a sense of the Caroli Ranch. What was life there like? What were you expected to do when you're injured, obviously? And, I think some people look at that and initially they thought, well, it's tough. There's a lot of sacrifices when you're an Olympic athlete and you have to play hurt, right? So describe for people, what's the difference between that understanding and what was actually happening?
Well, we get up in the morning and they provided food. If they had it, they would search our bags for food. We weren't allowed to bring food. Our parents were not allowed to go to the ranch. Usually wake up and have breakfast and not supposed to talk to each other at breakfast.
Why?
It's a distraction.
They wanted us to be focused 100% of the time. We weren't allowed to talk. We weren't allowed to smile. We weren't allowed to talk to each other. I was afraid to even say when I was really injured. And that was the other thing. I don't even remember being able to tell my coaches or the national staff about my injuries because I was afraid if I told them, sometimes I wasn't believed that I was even injured. So, and then if I really was injured, it's like, oh, well, sorry, someone's taking your spot. And that's why I competed on a fractured back, I think 3 times actually, a broken toe that's healed broken, because I was even afraid to tell them I was injured. And even thinking about it now, I'm like, oh my gosh, I usually would tell Larry more about my injuries than anybody else because I didn't want to be taken off national team or sent home.
And you could find it in him and then he abused you.
Exactly. And the thing is like, as a grown man, let's just put aside the fact that he was a doctor, he saw the abuse and what we were going through, and he should have reported it. He should have reported it himself.
But it was working for him.
Of course. So it was just an easy opportunity for him to abuse sexually.
Maddie, do you think that the Carolis knew what Larry was doing? That he was abusing gymnasts?
It's hard for me to believe that they didn't. I also think they just honestly did not care. They didn't. I'm sure they didn't even ask, how are the athletes doing? What are their injuries? I'm sure they just didn't care. I feel like they kept Larry around because Larry was willing to let us compete with injuries. At one point, I sprained and dislocated both feet at the same time, and Larry didn't even tape them. He didn't even get me a wheelchair to walk around. I had to find an office chair from our lounge and push myself around the camp, crawling. He just, they kept him around because he helped them out, and it's really hard for me to believe that they didn't know what was going on, and if they didn't know, then they honestly did not care.
But if any of you had complained to them and said, I think
wouldn't believe us.
Abusing me, what would they
They wouldn't listen.
They wouldn't have done
How would they
anything
react?
about it.
They'd laugh, probably.
I mean, if they didn't see it with their own eyes, they still allowed him in our rooms alone. I mean, sometimes at the ranch, I'd be the last to get treatment, And I was scared that I was going to get in trouble because it was already past curfew. And he's like, oh, it's okay. They know it's okay because I'm here and you're getting treatment. You're not going to get in trouble because you're with me. So why would they allow him to be in the rooms alone with us? That should never happen in any situation.
And when you came forward in 2016, Jamie, what was the reaction from USA Gymnastics?
Very negative towards me. I mean, I got attacked on social media. I wasn't believed. Some of my so-called friends in the gymnastics community didn't believe me, said I was making it up for attention. Some people called me a whore, a liar. You know, not Larry Nassar, he couldn't do this. Like, even a psychologist that worked with the team, like, basically there were messages sent on Facebook trying to campaign for positive Larry Nassar stories. And for me, I still have a hard time thinking about this happening to myself. And sorry, I'm just emotional today. Why I came forward was not for myself at all. It was because I have 6 nieces, and 3 nephews, and 3 on the way, and I did not want this to happen to anybody else. Yeah. And I didn't care that people, I mean, it was hurtful because of some of my friends, but I knew if any man or Larry would have done this to anyone in my family, my nieces or nephews, or even the little girls that I had coached for so long, that's how I knew what he was doing was wrong.
Still to come tonight, part 2 of our interview, and the question that pains the parents of these girls. How did they not know? The impact on the whole family. Next. But first tonight, we will go back to Washington because there's a lot of big news this evening on Capitol Hill. Oversight Committee Chairman Trey Gowdy, who you see here quite often, becoming the latest Republican and the 9th GOP committee chair to say see you later to Capitol Hill. So what is next for Mr. Gowdy? Our power panel, Chris Direwalt, Charlie Hurt, and Richard Fowler, next. Tonight, federal investigators are on the site of a deadly accident involving an Amtrak train in central Virginia. It was carrying GOP congressmen to their annual retreat in West Virginia. The train slammed into a garbage truck that was on the tracks. The driver was killed. Several others were injured. None of the lawmakers were seriously injured. They did come to help and come to the aid of the people who were. The tragedy comes as President Trump laid out an ambitious agenda last night, and he will speak at the retreat tomorrow. The 2018 midterms likely to be a big part of that agenda. Here now, Chris Direwalt, Fox News politics editor, Charlie Hurt, political columnist at the Washington Times, and Richard Fowler, nationally syndicated radio talk show host. Both are Fox News contributors. So obviously, on the heels of big State of the Union address last night, the GOP members off to begin their retreat and to hear from Vice President Pence and from President Trump. Chris, this was obviously a tragic event that happened today, but you look at it today in your writing in sort of the larger context of where they're going and what they have before them.
Well, you know, the saying in politics is you're never as far up as you think you are. You're never, but that means you're never as far down as you think you are. This is a good reminder, not just in politics, but for all of us. Republicans have this big triumphant night and the bright lights and all the people and all of the fawning and all the adulation. And just a matter of hours later, as they are riding on their way to really one of my favorite places in the entire world, I'd rather be at the Greenbrier than almost any place else. And as they're on their way, this tragedy occurs and life intervenes. To be good at politics, to be good at life, you've got to be able to deal with it when life intervenes and not just be good when it's all bright lights and makeup dust.
Yeah, and Senator Jeff Flake and Congressman Brad Wenstrup, both of whom ran to the aid of Steve Scalise not all that long ago, ironically, and we're right on the scene again and helping out. You know, when you look at what they have in terms of what's cut out for them lying ahead. And you think about the fact that Trey Gowdy just announced today that he will not be continuing. So, Charlie, there are now 9 GOP committee chairs who are not coming back. 34 GOP members on the Hill who are not running again for office, and they only can lose 24 seats on the Democratic side. They've got an uphill battle here.
Yeah, they sure do. And I have to say that of all of the defections of committee chairman, the decision of somebody like Trey Gowdy, who is a guy of his integrity, of his intelligence, the idea that he's calling it quits, I think really does speak volumes about what a kind of messed up and dispiriting place Washington has become. And it's very depressing because, of course, Trey Gowdy, he was in a powerful position. He was able to do very meaningful things, very important investigations, had extraordinary leeway and powers to do those things. And if he can't find inspiration doing the great things that he's been doing up here, and he would rather just return to the courtroom. Not that that's a bad thing. It's a wonderful thing. It's in so many ways more important. But the fact that he couldn't find that inspiration here is it's depressing, quite frankly.
Yeah, he says basically he feels like he can do more in the judicial system than in the political system. A frustrating experience even for a guy who has been so effective, as you point out. Richard. So last night, the State of the Union, it looked like there were some very unhappy faces. I was covering the whole thing and watching it. Let's show some of them. Nancy Pelosi was very unhappy during the speech. Steny Hoyer, unhappy. Representative Clyburn, not a happy man. Representative Gutierrez got up and walked out when everyone started chanting USA. Explain what it was that they were so very unhappy about last night, Richard.
Well, number one, I think if you were to take a pan of Republican faces 2 years ago or last year at the last official State of the Union,
you think they would have looked pretty gloomy too?
They would have looked pretty gloomy too because Obama. They were not a big fan of Obama. But beyond that, I think this is a larger problem because I think overall the speech that Trump gave last night was a very Republican speech. Ronald Reagan would have probably given it. George Bush would have given it. I think the difference here, the dichotomy here, is how Donald Trump treats people. Right? He has a lot of character flaws, which you can all agree about, that has caused him to not be able to reach across the aisle and gain the civility because he's shown no civility. And so I think that is what those faces represent, the lack of civility in Washington.
But if you're looking out there, Richard, if I'm standing up on that podium and I'm looking out there and I'm saying, let's look at this, opportunity that we have in immigration that we can all get together on. I'm looking at those faces and I'm saying, this is not going to happen.
Well, the thing about immigration,
they're going to let me get
is
anything here.
The thing on immigration is there were some sour faces on the right when he laid out his framework. If you look at Ted Cruz's face when he talked about allowing the 1.8 million Dreamers to have a pathway to citizenship, his face was just as sour as Nancy Pelosi's.
Chris, as you observed it last night, and you think about what has to get done. You think about the midterms. You think about February 8th, even. The next time the government's going to run out of money. How do they marshal their forces when it looks like the other side has zero interest in working with them on any of these things, really?
I don't think it's zero interest. I think the Republicans, how the midterms turn out, all of these things, as their recent improvement in polls demonstrates, how they act and what they can achieve has something to do with how this year is going to go. Whether it's tough or not, they have some control here. What it comes down to for Republicans, the House must be able to pass immigration legislation. They need to be able to get to 50 or 50-ish votes in the United States Senate on an immigration package. I guarantee you if they could do that, they could drag some Democrats into that discussion. They might be able to get to 60. I think this is more achievable and more attainable than we thought previously, but that depends on Republicans being able to execute again.
All right. So the beginning of the segment was really depressing. And then Chris sort of brought it back around and made everyone feel a little bit better. Richard, thank you very much. Charlie, Chris, good to see you guys.
Thanks, Martha. See you, Martha.
So coming up next, Hillary Clinton kind of botching her Me Too moment. She wants a do-over on the harasser that she refused to fire. We'll tell you what she's saying now. There's no debate. The campaign. Fired? I mean, he was doing creepy things. She's out there, as a huge advocate for women and girls every single day. I mean, I would think she would want this guy jettisoned immediately.
I think for a few reasons. And I should preface this with, she is asking herself the same exact questions over the last few days.
Are we going to hear more from Hillary Clinton on this?
We are, imminently.
So that was former Hillary Clinton advisor Philippe Reines telling me on Monday that Clinton would respond to intense backlash that she should have fired one of her 2008 campaign advisors who was accused on multiple occasions of sexual harassment. And the campaign director said he had to go. So just minutes before the State of the Union last night, Hillary Clinton posted a lengthy apology of sorts on Facebook that said this, quote, "I very much understand the question I'm being asked as to why I let an employee on my 2008 campaign keep his job despite inappropriate workplace behavior. The short answer is this. If I had it to do again, I wouldn't." Katie Pavlich, news editor at townhall.com and a Fox News contributor. And Philippe Reines is back. He worked on that campaign in 2008 and is a trusted advisor of Hillary Clinton for many years. Welcome. Good to see both of you here tonight. So, Philippe, I guess, some are making something of the fact that she, kind of slipped it in right before the State of the Union and that it wasn't sort of an unequivocal, that it wasn't unequivocal enough. It was a little bit hemming and hawing.
I'm not exactly sure what it is she was supposed to do beyond that. I think there are some people who would not be content until she cuts off her hair, throws ashes on her face, tattoos, "I'm sorry for everything I've ever done to anyone, anywhere, all the time." That was a very, very genuine, thoughtful, well-reasoned, direct response to the question that she was being asked. And I think people are skipping past what it says for yet another opportunity to beat up their favorite punching bag, Hillary Rodham Clinton.
Katie.
Well, I read every single word, and I didn't read it last night when she calculated the release of it right before the State of the Union, which once again just shows she was thinking about this politically, not necessarily just from a sincere apologetic point of view. If you read what she wrote, which is very long, she doesn't actually apologize for anything. She says she wouldn't have done it again, and then she goes into 5 paragraphs of justifying why exactly she did what she did, and she doesn't ever explain why the young woman was reassigned in this situation instead of this man being punished. And let's just not, that's one thing for people to be accused of bad behavior. Due process is certainly something that every man deserves. But this guy was recommended by multiple people on her staff to be fired. And yet you had this long, rambling note from her.
Let's talk about the possibility. Let's talk about the possibility that things look a little different in 2008 than they do in 2017. It doesn't make any of that behavior any better, but we are in a different place now on this, and that's some, Philippe, is that a statement that you agree with?
I think it's very hard to not look back with 2020 hindsight. What she did in this piece was to do her best to explain her thinking at the time. And I think, Katie, when you said that she reassigned the woman and didn't punish the man, that's not true. The woman got a job for the deputy campaign manager and later for the chairman of the campaign, and she flourished. That's not me saying it. That's not Hillary Clinton saying it.
And the man went on to sexually harass other women.
I'm talking about the woman herself. In terms of Mr. Strider was punished. He was demoted. His pay was docked. He was forced to go into counseling. He was prevented from in any way contacting her, and he was told that one more slip with anyone about anything and you're gone.
Look, okay, that's all fine and good. All right, that's great that those things were taken, those actions were taken. Here's the issue. This is not just an isolated incident with Hillary Clinton. 10 years ago, in terms of the sexual harassment environment that we are now supposedly in, is not any different. We were talking about sexual harassment in the 1990s. We knew what the rules were back then. Everyone in the private sector was taking sexual harassment training back then. And so for Hillary Clinton for 30 years to justify her political platform on being this champion of women and having this history at the State Department and in her career of going after women and not actually walking the walk when it comes to empowering them. Here we are again with this phony apology that she issued, which was all about her and her political calculation again.
I gotta go. I'm sorry, I'm out of time. Thank you guys. Good to have you both back. Quick break. We'll be right after this.